putting together this book adaptation or any documentary film, you've got your characters, right? And your characters are the people you're interviewing for the most part, depending on what kind of documentary you're putting together. But in this case, I had about 18 people from the book that needed to be interviewed. Another way that the story is told when I'm writing the script is through voiceover. The voiceover can sort of lead the narrative. But with this particular script, the producer that had commissioned me to write this, he asked me first to put it in chronological order, and he said he did not want voiceover. So in other words, he wanted all of the interviewees, their voices, to basically tell the story. And again, this is a movie that spans about a century, so I had to have some of the historians that were in the book talk about the past. I had to have people who had their careers that spanned about 40 years, 30 to 40 years. And the interview questions had to span 4 decades, really, of their careers. And that entailed me to do research on each and every one of them, which was really actually exciting. It was so great. It was like it was a whole other level of this story and this book, and then the adaptation to the movie. And then for each of their stories, for each of the interviewees' stories, I had to think still in this cinematic way, like there was going to be sub-stories within the story of this documentary, So what kind of sub-stories? Like, was there a scandal that went on? And yes, there were many scandals. And was there, a very emotive story to tell, something maybe a tragic story? And yes, there was those as well. So those were important to get into it as well.
My father came back from a trip to Africa with a film called Africa Speaks, and he showed it on a little 16 millimeter projector that we had in our basement. And I just fell in love with the continent. I ended up going to Africa beginning in 1964 many, many times. I met over my lifetime with many African leaders, including Jomo Kenyatta, who's the first president of Kenya, Julius Nyerere, who's the long-term president of Tanzania, Nelson Mandela, many, many, many other African leaders. And I had a fertile interest in the problems of how U.S. aid and foreign assistance can sometimes exacerbate problems, political problems, cultural problems, the problems of hunger and poverty, rather than alleviating them. And, a sensitivity to the idea that we need to be willing to listen to local leadership, and that we need to nurture community-based solutions.
There are certain things that one thought one knows.
I also had to consider their personalities. Could they tell something really well? That was also a factor. Those questions had to garner answers that were going to tell the story in a cinematic sort of way too. Wow. So it's quite complicated in that way.
In 1910, John D. Rockefeller really kind of took over medicine, particularly the medical schools. And they redirected medicine to be totally focused on pharmaceutical interventions and also various surgical procedures. In other words, to make it a real business.
So I was asked to select who in the book should be interviewed. And then I was asked to write up all of their interview questions. So I selected, a whole bunch, because a lot of people will say no, especially at that time, that people didn't really want to put their faces on the screen for obvious reasons at that time. But we managed to get 18 brave souls to be a part of it, including Bobby Kennedy, of course. It's his book. and he was in it. And he ended up doing voiceover. So voiceover did end up telling the story in many ways. Yeah. So despite the original idea, yeah.
You have to tie it all in together
Gotta tie it
somehow
on.
with your. That's where you put your magic, your twist to it, and kind of give it your magical touch.